So in today's video, we'll be going over stage check 3 for your instrument. This is basically a video of Travis going over things on what to expect. If you're preparing for an instrument check ride, hopefully this is helpful to you. Let's toss it over to Travis.
Alrighty, instrument stage 3 ground. This is going to be essentially your mock EOC. So this is going to be everything under the sun as it pertains to instrument. Biggest piece of advice I would give you for this is make sure you're very familiar with the instrument ACS. This is a standardized set of rules we have to follow and test you on. So if you're familiar with that, there really shouldn't be any surprises going into this. But as I mentioned in the stage 2 check video, there's going to be a lot more covered in the stage 3 ground here. So we're going to combine stages 1 and 2 in here and then add in everything else that we haven't covered up to this point. So like every other stage 3 check or EOC, we're going to start with pilot qualifications, privileges, run through that both for yourself and the aircraft. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that, but expect the first 20-ish minutes to be about pilot qualifications and aircraft requirements. On the stage 3 check and your EOC, you're going to have a IFR nav log. So two schools of thought here. You can do a paper nav log or an electronic nav log. Whatever you're more comfortable with, I would recommend going that route, but just know you have to be able to explain everything for either route that you choose. So if you do paper, make sure you can explain everything. If you do electronic, you're going to need to take some time to really understand where ForeFlight gets all of these numbers from. So I'd highly recommend sitting down with your instructor or somebody that's really good with ForeFlight to make sure you know how to update performance profiles and get everything buttoned up in ForeFlight, and you can explain what all these numbers mean on the nav log there. So you'll have an nav log associated with that. We'll spend a good amount of time talking about weather. Again, this is going to be important when it comes to alternate requirements. If we actually need to file IFR, alternates, where we're going, fuel requirements, and then we'll kind of segue that with your weather briefing. So we'll talk about the weather at where we're departing from, where we're arriving to. You may even get some simulated weather conditions, which is going to imply you're probably going to need to file and you're probably going to need an alternate. So again, big topic is going to be alternate, why you chose the alternate that we're going to, does it meet the requirements, what approaches are we going to be shooting, all that. So be familiar with everywhere along the route. Even though we're obviously not going to be going to this destination, it's going to be expected, you know, how we're getting there, you know, if something happens along the way, what we're going to do. When we land there, what approach are we going to be shooting? So have all this picked out, make sure you know what the winds are, pick out the approach, and then you're likely going to talk about that approach. That's going to be your approach plate symbology, is that place. And then you'll go over that, you'll go over the alternate, and then you'll talk about the alternate approach that you would be shooting. So make sure all of that is within standards. See, pretty often folks choose an alternate, and if you look at all the approach plates, they say not authorized. So make sure you have a valid alternate, or that'll immediately be a no-go. Moving on from that, again, you'll be talking about instrument approach procedures. So we'll bring in a couple new topics here. Standard instrument departures, what that entails, performance criteria, what's going to guarantee you obstacle coverage if you accept a SID. Do we have to accept a SID? So departure procedures will be something new that's brought into stage 3. Along with lost comms procedures, low en route. The low en route chart will be brought in here, so make sure you know everything there is to know about the low en route chart, what all the different colors mean, GPS waypoints, Tango Airways, Victor Airways, MOCAs, Arokas, all of that. You'll need to know what it looks like and be able to decipher all of that. So spend some time talking about the low en route chart. Talk about the National Airspace System again. Operation of systems is going to be big here, specifically the electrical system. So make sure you know in great detail how our electrical system works, voltages, amps, if we lose our alternator, how long the batteries are going to last, what capabilities we have once we've lost power. You know, can we shoot an approach on our emergency bus? Can we shoot an approach after we've lost power? And be able to talk through like those critical situations. Is it an emergency? Is an alternator failure emergency? Things like that will be discussed. So big topic, big focus on electrical system, know what kind of autopilot we have. Again, you'll talk about all the systems, but these are some of the bigger ones that you'll be going over. And then system failures. So know pedostatic blockages, if you have alternator failures, things like that. We'll run through all those different scenarios. Again, we're looking for good ADM here, and safety is of utmost importance, especially whenever flying IFR can be very dangerous. So we really want to make sure that you're making safe decisions whenever we're talking about all of these different scenarios. So come to the stage 3 instrument ground prepared. It will be difficult. And again, we'll be covering everything, but if you can get through the stage 3 ground, you should have relatively no issues getting through your EOC, because we're going to be covering all the same stuff here. So expect it to be thorough, expect to come prepared. It's going to take 2.5 hours. We're going to go over everything that you talked about in private pilot, and we're going to be adding in all this new instrument knowledge. Again, just to highlight instrument departures, approach plates, IFR nav logs, the differences and all that. Big emphasis on weather here, icing, interpreting weather charts, and all that stuff. So study up. All right, instrument stage 3. Good news is the instrument stage 3 flight is not all that different from the stage 2. We're just bringing in a couple new things here. So expect to do everything you did in the stage 2 flight, instrument cockpit check, the 3 different approaches, ATC clearances and all that. And then what we'll be adding in new here is going to be a departure. So you'll receive a craft clearance, be expected to plug that in, and then comply with it. Want to make note again here, staying ahead of the plane, right? So if you get this departure clearance, make sure you've got that built correctly in your FMS. Make sure that if there's a backup way to fly that departure, you have that loaded in. So for example, if you have it loaded up in your GPS, but this is also a VOR departure, make sure you have those VOR radials and courses set in, so that if your GPS fails, hint, hint, you'll be able to easily switch over to the standby VOR and fly that departure with no issue. We'll also be introducing in lost comms procedures here, so make sure you understand what to do in lost comms. And just a general note here with lost comms and everything instrument is the idea here is in a lost comm situation, it's impossible for us to simulate every possible scenario here. At the end of the day, we're looking for safety and predictability. So if you get into a lost comm situation, the most important thing is that you as a pilot stay safe, and then you be as predictable as possible. So getting to a safe altitude first, and then flying the appropriate route second is going to be the order of operations there. And then again, if you get there early or late, what are we going to do in those situations? A lot of this lost comm stuff is going to be scenario based. So they may say, what are you going to do in this scenario? Like, what are you going to do if you lost comms and then you get there 30 minutes early? So be able to talk through these various scenarios. The 2 or 3 most common ones you're going to see here, though, are going to be you're going to lose comms at some point getting vectored onto your departure procedure. You lose comms after you're given a hold and expect further clearance time, and that time comes up and you haven't heard anything. Or you could even lose comms while being vectored onto approach, or they could just ask you what you're going to do there. So be prepared for the various lost comms procedures. Again, you're going to have to do some type of hold. Could be published, unpublished, GPS or VOR, so make sure you're familiar with how to do that. I encourage you all at this point to know how to plug in both the GPS and VOR hold in the MFD, how to build a VOR hold in the MFD. This can be very helpful because it accounts for any wind corrections, which depending on the winds, these can be pretty difficult to fly if there's a lot of crosswinds. You'll do unusual attitudes, precision approach, non-precision approach, circle to land, just like you did in stage 2, and then you'll have some type, maybe even multiple emergencies or equipment failures. So same failures from stage 2, stage 3, WAS failure, GPS failure, right? Partial panel, ARS failure, or PFD failure. And one other thing I want to point out with these failures, anytime you have an equipment failure, a required reporting point is set equipment failure. So a big thing we see here is you get that failure and then you don't report it. So make sure you're simulating, again, reporting this failure to your examiner so that they know that you know proper procedure. All in all, your instrument flight should take, again, 1.5 to 2 hours here, and you'll be set